Joined via Skype by Maynard Manyowa, investigative journalist with Khuluma Afrika in Zimbabwe in Harare. Very good evening to you, Mr. Manyowa. Thank you so much for joining us. The honeymoon seems to be over for President Emmerson Mnangagwa just 4 months after ascending to power. And the opposition has made it very clear that they're not going to give him any chance. They're going to make things very difficult for him. What's their gripe now?
First and foremost, thank you for having me on your show. And with regards to the question, the opposition has laid out quite a number of grievances. Among them is that they repeatedly reiterate that there were inconsistencies and irregularities with specifically the presidential election, which was held in July in Zimbabwe. And among other things, they have raised the worsening economic situation in the country. There's a massive fuel crisis over the last 2 weeks. There are queues everywhere you go in Harare. The rate of the bond, the US dollar, for example, has ballooned. Basic prices of basic goods and commodities in shops have shot up. And the standard of living has really, shot up. And the MDC is riding on that, and they're riding on the debate surrounding the election, and they're saying that these are some of the issues that are sticking out. And that's among the issues they've raised. They did deliver a petition today to Parliament, and it did include some of the things that I've mentioned.
As you've just mentioned, Maynard, the MDC argues that the country's problems are caused largely by the fact that Mnangagwa's, or rather President Emmerson Mnangagwa's government is an illegitimate government. I mean, it lacks legitimacy. And it's quite interesting, given the fact that, after the elections, the international community or the election observers gave the elections their thumbs up and said that everything went well and according to plan. And is it really fair accusing the incumbent leadership of inheriting problems of the previous leadership?
No, of course it's not fair. Look, as a first starting point, legitimacy is never conferred by the person who loses the election. At the end of the day, President Mnangagwa did win the election. That's according to the Electoral Commission. The MDC did challenge this result. It was taken to the Constitutional Court, and the highest court in the land did rule that the victory was legitimate. So legitimacy cannot come from the person who has lost the election. And as you have rightly said, several international bodies, despite noting irregularities surrounding the polls and the certain sticking points, but they've pointed out largely to say that they feel that the election was quite credible. So it's a bit unfair to outright say that Emmerson Mnangagwa is not legitimate. He is the very same leader who swore in MDC MPs into parliament. So all the MDC MPs today who are in parliament, who are supposedly sitting in a legitimate August House, are sitting in a legitimate August House for which they were sworn in by Emmerson Mnangagwa. But from the perspective of the MDC, we do need to understand that for them, it is a sticking point, it is a low-hanging fruit by which they can grapple onto. I do not agree inherently with the assertions that Zimbabwe is suffering from a legitimacy problem per se. I think Emmerson Mnangagwa inherited a government that was suffering a very huge, budget deficit. The domestic debt was far greater than the international debt. We basically are the country that consumes everything that is imported. Zimbabwe imports as much as toothpicks and matchsticks from South Africa. Even toothpaste and toothbrushes, it's all imported. So certainly the circumstances within the country are not sustainable. And the present scenario whereby we have a currency in Zimbabwe, a bond note, which is kind of money but not really money. It's somewhat of a currency but not really a currency. It's 1:1 on paper, but if you are to go to the bank today, you can't quite change those notes for the US dollars. So we have all of those things that Mnangagwa has inherited, and they've made his position a little bit untenable. But we have to forgive the opposition. I think we can't hold them at ransom or bit them with a big stick. They are doing well to try and hold on to the little branches that they can and say that Mnangagwa is illegitimate, etc. But at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, whether I like it or not personally as a journalist or somebody else does, the point is Emmerson Mnangagwa remains a legitimate president of Zimbabwe. He was sworn in and he is the head of state. But the opposition outside of the legitimacy, they do raise some important points specifically to do with the standards of living and the cost of living in the country.
The Finance Minister Maynard did announce an intention to cut salaries of all cabinet ministers and senior civil servants by 5% effective January next year. I mean, this is indicative of the fact that he wants to be seen to be trying to be doing something, to quell these impending crises. So, is this enough to quell the fires?
Well, it's certainly not enough, because the challenge, my brother, with austerity measures is half the time they mean that everybody in the country gets to have a little less money in their pocket. And because of that, when he was appointed, he was the celebrity appointee in President Mnangagwa's cabinet. People were bidding for him on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook. He was this guy who was working at international institutions, and he has come in with these austerity measures. He's cut the salaries of civil servants. He's introduced this tax regime. And obviously, when people start to get hit where it hurts the most, especially their own pockets, I mean, he's increased excise duty on fuel, etc. All of those things have begun to make him unpopular. But from an economical point of view, from an economical perspective, it does point to the fact that he is trying to fix the country. I do agree with him, and I do agree with the president when they say that Zimbabwe really is due for some bitter medicine, and the medicine is bitter, it is salty, and it does not taste nice, but at the end of the day it is extremely necessary. So these are signs and measures, but the challenge with austerity measures is they do hit the ordinary citizens hard, and Zimbabwe's ordinary citizens survive beyond the poverty datum line, and many of them are unemployed, many of them do not have access to health, many of them don't have access to education. A lot of the gains we had made in the first 10 years of Robert Mugabe's leadership have all gone. But he is trying, and it is a sign that is pointing perhaps in the right direction. But the challenge is, outside of fixing the country in 10 years, for example, or becoming a middle-income economy by 2030, basic people do need to go to bed, and they do need to have a plate of pap and some meat to eat. And the austerity measures seem to be eating away from that. So that has made him a tad bit unpopular.
All right, Maynard, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. That was an investigative reporter in Harare, Zimbabwe, Maynard Manyowa, speaking to us about the protest that we saw taking place earlier on the streets of Harare.